Okay, welcome back to The Explainer. I am so incredibly pumped to have you here today because we're digging into a seriously fascinating piece of source material. We are unpacking a highly complicated and honestly, famously unresolved case file straight from the true crime and paranormal podcast Saute Buter Gatana, which translates to True Ghost Stories. We're looking at a specific investigation inside a North Kolkata house that really blurs the line between human tragedy and unexplained phenomena. I absolutely love cases like this because they force us to look at the data, map out the timeline, and try to piece together exactly what happened. So, you might be wondering what happens when a routine investigation completely uncovers an unsolved tragedy. That is the core question we're tackling today. Throughout this explainer, we're keeping an impartial, highly structured look at the evidence presented in the source material. We're going to put the claims of the investigators right side by side with the very real medical realities of the family living there. It's a totally gripping narrative, and mapping it out visually is going to help us make sense of all the chaos. To really ground our analysis, I want to start by looking at the exact raw notes from the source transcript that kicked off this baffling case file. Literally, the notes say, full red spike, exactly complicated. I mean, talk about panic shorthand, right? This raw fragment gives us such a real window into the mindset of the investigators when they were on the scene. It wasn't some neat, tidy walkthrough. It was chaotic, it was sudden, and just like the notes say, it was exactly complicated. But honestly, before all the red spikes and the complicated investigations, this whole shebang started incredibly simply. It began with just a single report sent to this specific WhatsApp number, 629-675-195. It's kind of crazy to think that a massive deep dive into an unsolved mystery all started with a basic text message sent to a podcast's hotline. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Kolkata House Mystery, Tracing the Origins of the Investigation. We have our starting point, but how did the team actually end up in that house? Let's look at the timeline to bring some order to this chaotic sequence of events. It's like a giant puzzle. On day 1, you've got a seemingly normal birthday party that suddenly takes a turn, triggering the initial reports of strange things happening. By week 2, the family is dealing with such intense frustration and unusual events that they actually seek out an astrologer for a consultation. When that doesn't fix things, week 3 hits, and the paranormal investigation team officially arrives on site. And tragically, this all culminates in September, when a sudden stroke and subsequent death occur right there in the home. But who was actually sending out these SOS signals? Well, the reports didn't just stay on WhatsApp. They started popping up on social media, too. The source specifically notes the involvement of an active school teacher, someone well-regarded in the community who was deeply concerned about what was going on. And most importantly, the family living in the house was already dealing with severe physical ailments and mounting frustration. They were just desperate for a solution, which perfectly sets the stage for the investigation team to walk in. Section 2, Tools of the Trade, Grounding the Supernatural in Methodology. Now, when the investigators crossed the threshold of that North Kolkata home, they didn't just wander in with flashlights. They brought specific technical gear to try and actually quantify what the family was experiencing. Their main tool of choice? An EMF meter, measuring the electromagnetic field. In this kind of investigation, EMF is used to detect potential negative energy or environmental anomalies. Essentially, they're using it to track unseen energy shifts in a space, almost like looking for invisible fingerprints left behind in the room. Now, what's really fascinating about this slide is how the source material contrasts the baseline energy of the house with specific, highly concentrated areas. The investigators meticulously mapped out what they categorized as normal level energy against a designated investigation hotspot. So this wasn't a case of the entire house just going haywire all at once. Instead, the data pointed to highly localized, specific zones of activity that the team really honed in on. And it wasn't just digital readings. They were looking for physical indicators too, specifically ectoplasm. Actually, the transcript uses this incredibly unique phrase, ectoplasm gator movement. Yeah, that's what they called it. They were describing unusual physical movements and environmental changes that seemed to accompany the energy spikes. It is a super unique piece of paranormal terminology specific to this investigation. To capture all this, the team deployed a very specific arsenal. They had their EMF meters for tracking energy. They also brought in a simple magnetic compass, which, interestingly, the source explicitly notes began malfunctioning wildly during the session. And finally, they used footprint machines to capture unseen steps. Just impartially reporting the source's claims here, the investigators noted these footprint machines were operating on a full charge, which made the subsequent unusual readings highly perplexing to the team. Section 3. Encounters with the entity, mapping the evidence. All right, so the gear is set up, the timeline is locked. What physical anomalies did the investigators actually claim to witness and record while inside? The phenomena they reported were all over the map. The team claimed to see the manifestation of shadow figures in their peripheral vision. As we mentioned, they dealt with sudden compass malfunctions and those unexplained ectoplasm movements. We see the return of our earlier quote, the full red spike in their EMF readings. But honestly, perhaps the most unsettling part were the physical sensations reported by the team. Sudden spine chills and, bizarrely, localized lower back problems manifesting out of nowhere. Adding a whole other layer of complexity, the source transcript places peculiar astrological and temporal constraints on the activity. According to the investigation, the entity didn't just act randomly. Its activity was tightly linked to specific days of the week, specifically Tuesday, referred to in Bengali as Mongol, and Saturday, or Soni. The podcast connects these specific days to the concept of residual energy. It suggests a cyclical, traditional pattern rather than just a random haunting. But even with those patterns, tracking the source was apparently incredibly frustrating. I pulled this direct quote because it just perfectly captures the confusing, circular nature of the investigation. Round and round, nothing. EMF investigation hotspot for really exist activities. The investigators were literally chasing their tails, mapping hotspots that seemed to just shift or vanish right as they closed in. It really highlights how difficult it is to apply scientific tools to totally unpredictable environments. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point, Section 4. A tragic family history, the human cost. Because, behind all the EMF meters and the creepy shadow figures, there were real people living in immense distress. When you look at the underlying tragedies uncovered by the investigation, a startling pattern emerges. The family was dealing with a husband's severe recovery struggles and his absolutely debilitating lower back problems. Remember a few minutes ago when we noted the investigators themselves suddenly felt severe lower back pain during their session? The physical anomalies reported by the team, strangely and tragically, mirrored the very real, severe health problems faced by the residents of the home. When we zoom out and look at the sequence of medical emergencies, the human toll is just devastating. Step 1. The frustrated, desperate family consults an astrologer to help with their terrible string of bad luck and illness. Step 2. A sudden onset of a stroke leaves a family member severely disabled, making their struggle even harder. And finally, Step 3, a subsequent death occurs in the home in September. On paper, medical professionals categorize it as a normal death. But for the family, and honestly the investigators too, that medical categorization didn't offer much comfort. This raw quote captures the tragic juxtaposition perfectly. Normal death, exactly already disabled, recovery for nothing, shock. It really hits the nail on the head regarding the stark contrast between a clinical medical explanation and the deep paranormal fears that had already taken root in the house. Writing normal death on a certificate doesn't just erase the shock and trauma the family experienced. Which brings us to Section 5, an unsolved paranormal case. Lingering questions. So, what does this all mean? How do we synthesize the technical anomalies with such a profound human loss? Let's analyze the ambiguous aftermath of the team's time in North Kolkata. It forces us to grapple with an ultimate, completely impartial question. On one hand, item 1, are we just looking at a deeply sad, tragic medical coincidence? A family battered by health issues whose immense grief manifested as environmental tension. Or, on the other hand, item 2, are we witnessing the effects of intentional residual energy, exactly as the podcast explores? The source presents the data, but it steadfastly refuses to give us an easy answer. Ultimately, the investigators packed up their gear. The transcript actually says they left feeling the thunder of the experience, this heavy, lingering, emotional, and energetic weight. Because they couldn't definitively prove the source of the phenomena, they left without clear answers, officially cementing this in their files as a truly unsolved and complicated case. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. When the tools are packed away and those EMF meters finally go silent, does residual energy remain, or is it just the echo of human tragedy? The Kolkata house mystery walks a very delicate line between supernatural claims and real-world grief. It's a reminder that sometimes the most haunting things we investigate aren't the shadows in the corner, but the profound complexities of human suffering. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive in the explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you guys next time.